Hello, friends. Patrick MacFarlane here of the Liberty Weekly Podcast, coming at you with another episode. This one is episode number 196, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/196. And on the line again, returning guest Keith Knight. How's it going, man?
It's going very well, Pat. I had the great pleasure of coming across an old Rothbard article the other day. The second I read it, I knew just a flat rating of this needs to be up. So I put that on my channel. I think it was from 1977 in Reason magazine. I just love coming across those. It's called The Conspiracy Theory of History Revisited. So if people want to check that out, it's just classic Rothbard knocking down worldviews in a page and a half. So yes, it's going pretty well. How about you?
It's going good, man. Yeah, and you won't see that anything like that Rothbard article in Reason magazine nowadays, would you?
Oh no, and it's not even that crazy. He makes a praxeological argument that you would make for any other group. You know, why is someone going to work? Well, so they can act in their self-interest. Well, what about the CEO? Yeah, they act in their self-interest. People in government. Oh no, totally different. Public service. The morality applies totally differently to them, and logic, of course not. Turns out. The people you want to put in charge of everything are just as biased and greedy at best. Sometimes it tends to attract the worst people. The Zbigniew Brzezinskis from Poland come to America just to grab a slice of tyranny. So yeah, classic Rothbard stuff there. And thank you to, gosh, it had to have been LouRockwell.com that archived it.
Yeah, so for this episode, not to bury the lead, we're going to go through this. There was a video that Tim Pool had Joe Rogan, Alex Jones, Blair White, and Michael Malice on. And there was a confrontation between Michael Malice and who's this other character that he's confronting?
That is Drew Hernandez, who testified at the Rittenhouse trial. He was one of the guys filming. He had a decent angle. He was on Tucker Carlson's show, I believe, but that's what I know him from.
Okay. Well, before we get into that, just wanted to remind everyone that both Keith and I are on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org. And one of our colleagues, Kyle Anzalone, this was my segue, but I buried it. But one of our colleagues, Kyle Anzalone, did a piece, an episode about Reason Magazine pushing the Uyghur genocide, State Department conspiracy theory. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So we're going to get into that Michael Malice video. Then we're going to talk about 23 things that they don't tell you about capitalism. And this is a critique of capitalism. And I think there's a lot of fodder in here that we can play with. And then we're just going to kind of cut loose and do kind of an end of the year show about, you know, what happened over the last year. What are some of the themes that we covered? And how our year went. So I think that'll be really cool, kind of a Christmas episode here. But Keith, let's just jump into this clip here.
I was agreeing with you.
I want to ask Drew a question, Mr.
And you know what? I am actually not getting the audio.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
No, but we definitely had it before, though.
Left was like, haha, he's bad. That's fascism. And I'm like, I thought I was agreeing with you.
I want to ask Drew a question, Mr. Constitution. Given what you saw in Kenosha, what is your perspective on the police?
My perspective is that the police are going to have to start making some serious decisions soon, because if they're not going to side with their constitutional oaths, they are literally betraying the American people. So I think when police are getting into that type of territory, they're going to start enforcing a police state. Yeah. So I think right now where we are with the advent of Marxism, cultural Marxism becoming mainstream, I think the excuse when police come out and say, I'm just doing my job, is what the Nazis said. So I think now that is a crime against humanity. And I think when police aren't having the will to say, you know what, I'm not going to enforce this, I'm going to continue to do my job, I think they're going to have to make that decision. But if they do that, if they decide not to and pull out of it, I think that that's something they need to consider before they become police officers. Because if you're going to take a job like that, you're going to have to be prepared to make a decision whether I'm going to obey unconstitutional or illegal edicts or mandates, or I am going to resign.
I just got one quick question.
Okay, so Keith, any comments there?
See, I thought that answer was good overall, because you and I know what Malice is asking him, but the average person who's not a Malice reader or someone who watches his show is going to sort of catch the drift immediately. The significance is, what about what is your opinion about the police and their distinguishing feature? So they're going to have to make tough decisions. Well, anyone who decides to go to college and take out a big loan has to make a big decision. A lot of people make big decisions. We're talking about the distinguishing feature of the police, which he sort of goes into of, I was just following orders. He goes, that's something that they're going to have to deal with. In any other circumstance, I think the average person would be able to say, I agree or disagree. This person was right or wrong. They're justified or unjustified. And here should be the consequences for doing so. Hey, I'm a kidnapper. You're a kidnapper. Well, yeah, you're going to have some decisions to make. Yeah, I guess. But isn't there like a really big elephant in the room you're ignoring? Ghislaine Maxwell's going to have some decisions to make. Can you please take a side? Please.
Yeah, and I like how Malice massages him a little bit further, so we'll get into that.
Given that all gun laws are unconstitutional, violate the Second Amendment, what do you think of police officers that arrest people who have guns that might be in violation of the Second Amendment, who are otherwise peaceful people?
Repeat it one more time.
Police who enforce gun laws, which are all unconstitutional, against peaceful citizens. What do you think of those police?
And speak more into the mic. Your audio's low.
Is my audio low?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I just think that I think the biggest issue right now with police officers, and I've talked to many of them, I've had conversations with them, I think a lot of them are really like illiterate to the law itself. Not all of them, but every time you talk to one of them, like they're really not sure how they're enforcing the law correctly. Like they're not even aware of some of the laws themselves. And
You're just completely ignoring my question.
Yeah.
Gun laws are all unconstitutional. What do you think of police officers who enforce gun laws against peaceful citizens?
I think the Second Amendment is for all Americans.
Right. So what do you think, again, for the third time, what do you think of police officers who enforce gun laws against peaceful citizens?
I think that's just something they're going to have to decide to do, whether they're going to do it or not.
Well, what do you think of them?
That's what I think.
That they're just going to have to, you're just going to shrug your shoulders?
They're just going to have to make a decision.
So if a cop arrests someone who has a handgun illegally, who's not hurting anybody, or has some kind of red flag thing, what do you think of that police officer who puts that person in jail?
Yeah, I don't think that's a good thing.
But what do you think of that individual?
The individual?
The individual police officer, yeah.
That's what I just said, yeah.
They're evil.
Are they? Yeah, but you said that's not a good thing. You know, me burning a cake is not a good thing as well.
Yeah,
like
I think it's not a good
the
thing.
human being. His name is Officer
You're asking
John.
the same question over and over.
Officer John
Well,
Smith.
you're not answering it.
Let me
also not.
Hold on. Let me phrase the question. There was a woman. I tell the story all the time. Who was from Pennsylvania with a legal gun and drove into New Jersey.
Right.
And we'll give the cop a name. Officer John Smith pulled her over. And he said, you know, your tail light's out or whatever. And he said, do you have a weapon on you? He said, yes, I do. And he says, oh, okay. She politely informed him, but in New Jersey, you can't have it. So he took her out, he cuffed her, and they tried putting her in prison for 4 years. How do you feel about John Smith?
I mean, I would have to really take a look at the entire situation.
Okay, that's
Well,
a
another
I mean,
big
I'm not trying to
problem
avoid
is
anything. I just
that
don't want to say
a lot of
You
the
just avoided
decent
it
cops are
successfully.
leaving because
No,
of
I
the
didn't.
vax.
There's no decent cops.
Well, I was just gonna make a cry.
Okay. What do we think, Keith?
So a few things where he was very clear in his analysis of the Kyle Rittenhouse case, who was right and who was wrong. Kyle was totally justified. Kyle was defending himself against an aggressor. But notice how this adult who's on one of this show has to be in the top 0.1% of shows with views, the Timcast in Real Life channel. He's on one of the biggest shows, and he's not really feeling the pressure to really take a side on this, even though with the Rittenhouse case, he can clearly take a side. Good guy, bad guy, aggressor. What should the result be? Kyle should get off but without punishment because he didn't do anything wrong. But the second we put the culprit in a badge and give him this name, cop or officer, and you're dealing with cops in different states. Well, you always have to know a little more information. Well, this was a hypothetical. John Smith was not the actual cop's name. So the assumption is, assuming this is all the information we have at this point in your knowledge level, what do you think would be justified happening to one of these actors? Does she go to jail? Does he go to jail? Does nothing happen to either of them? So someone in this high of a position of influence talking to this many people is still not able to see things clearly. He's hearing the words that Malice is saying. They both speak English. He's right there. He's talking. He's not whispering, yet he's not processing what he's actually asking because it's so uncomfortable. Just like it's a knee-jerk reaction to not lean into something or just to move when you're sitting down. You don't say, this is uncomfortable, so how am I going to move? You just automatically move. Your brain will sometimes automatically say, oh, my worldview is really threatened. If I say that woman should resist the officer just like she would resist anyone else. I'm not, even being anti-cop. I'm just saying they don't have rights that the citizens don't have. That's a totally fine position that you can have without exactly causing a civil war. But he's not able to take that stance, and this is what the cult does to people. Someone who's as nice as that guy, someone willing to really put himself on the line in front of all these people, hasn't really considered if there's a big moral difference between the badge wearers and the non-badge wearers. So one of the biggest things that just stood out to me was how people can hear you without processing exactly what you're saying, and that's why you sometimes have to say the same thing multiple times. I would ask this guy, who when I used to work in the Coctopus, I would say, you think it's ever okay for the state to forcibly stop capitalist acts between consenting adults? Because, he was a supporter of gay marriage, but he also wanted like a ton of government to, support the nation state or whatever. And he goes, well, the thing is, China actually has a lot of subsidies, and these subsidies actually hurt our economy, and they're really just like dumping products on us. It's not even like these, a trade where you have two equal partners. And I go, okay, interesting. I'm going to ask the same question again. Does the government have the right to stop? Does anyone have the right to stop capitalist actions between consenting adults? Am I saying that right? I was intentionally using Nozick's term of capitalist actions between consenting adults. I think that's what it is. But I'm not kidding. I asked it probably 10 times, and we were in front of people, and I was actually texted by the guy I was working with, who you actually know. You were on his show a couple years ago. He texted me. He goes, dude, knock it off. This is getting bad. Because he was at the next table. You can literally ask the same thing, and their mind will just be like, that's uncomfortable. But this is about the topic of trade, so let me mention something else. The tariffs actually in the Smoot-Hawley era didn't affect the Great Depression as much as you'd think. They will not answer the question because going there is so uncomfortable. It's threatening their worldview in the same way it would threaten like their livelihood. They're almost terrified to go because it's so uncomfortable. The cognitive dissonance is so uncomfortable. It's almost like they cannot hear the words that you're saying. So you just have to repeat it like that as many times as possible.
Now, what do you think about Malice's specific approach? Like with these types of people, like you're describing Drew Hernandez as being, he's a nice, well-meaning guy. It seems like he'd be a natural ally. Do you hold his feet to the fire, or do you just gently kind of, do you think that this approach that Malice gave, is that going to make Drew Hernandez think?
I'm not sure if this exact wording, but it was on the spot. And, Malice is so good that if I ever see something different from him when it comes to communicating the ideas of anarchism, it's most likely me who is wrong. So I need to do many double takes before saying what he should have done. Is it's just so cheap to watch something and then have 10 minutes to think about it when he's on the spot with all the cameras and all competing for, mic time with Joe Rogan and Alex Jones and Blair White were there. One thing I would have said, maybe just at the end, I would have said, just one thing I would ask you to consider. It seems like you have a double standard. It's this concept usually referred to as statism, where you have a different moral standard for people in government. Would you consider not having a double standard? Like, so whether it was a cop doing it or like a priest doing it or a fireman or a teacher or your dad, would you consider not having that double standard for police officers or politicians? I would think something like that would maybe plant the seed a little more efficiently, because asking, what do you think of that cop? What do you mean? Well, what do I think? I'm not sure that nails down the difference, but he certainly caught him off guard. And for him to not even be able to say, oh yeah, well, that cop should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There's even like a typical statist answer that you can give to something like that. And the fact that he wasn't even willing to give that just goes to show you how deep it goes. How, someone willing to go on Tucker Carlson, put their ideas to the test. He goes, no, that's a little too far. I got to, I got to keep giving my group the benefit of the doubt here. What would you have done differently?
Well, I don't know. Like you said, it's easy to be an armchair quarterback. But at the same time, I like that Malice was firm, but, Malice has his way of being confrontational in that kind of like snarky, trolly kind of way. But that's just his brand. And I'm just trying to think like, when you're having regular conversations with people in your life that personally, I guess maybe the best way is just to be yourself. Sometimes like a gentle hand isn't enough. There's people that we all know in our lives who need that firm kind of approach to it and be like, no, you're being an idiot right now. Or I guess my personal style is to try and be nice about it. But I'm thinking back to when, I became a voluntarist, and in the conversations that were had and the things that really made me think, and it was a gentle, kind of the Socratic method, kind of asking. It's like you get in a situation and when you try and convince someone, it's more you questioning the other person about their beliefs. And I think that's the right approach because they often haven't really thought about it. So if you lightly examine them from that perspective, then that's usually when you find those logical inconsistencies. And I think if there's someone who cares about being consistent, then this is the candles in the dark Larkin Rose thing. It's like months later or weeks later, they'll be up at night thinking about it, massaging that splinter out. And I wonder if Drew Hernandez is that type of person.
Yeah, and so often, the more just about approaches to, how society can cooperate in a voluntary basis instead of a coercive one. Even if someone says, "I don't care about consistency, I just want safety." Well, if you just want safety and you just want peace, why would you want that safety to be determined by a coercively funded monopoly who doesn't have an incentive to provide you safety? They get paid whether you're safe or not. In fact, if things get dangerous, they'll say, we need more money. And then they'll never be like, things are good now, so we're going to return it. They're always going to want to give you worse quality and increase their price like any other monopoly would. So even if, they're not the great philosopher that, I someday hope to emulate, almost any time they have some sort of desire, I think basically through all these mechanisms, even if they say, I don't care, I just want this Bismarckian will to power, I think the state should have a ton of influence in life. I don't care, violence or voluntarism doesn't make a difference. And I go, how well do you think you are going to do under that system? You think they're going to be calling you, hey, what should I do? Well, what are some laws I should pass? You tell me. They're going to mow you down like they would anyone else. So even the people who will justify the North Korean state, which, yes, I've run into in my personal life multiple times, even there, you can still plant a seed with them that not only is it immoral, it's probably not even in your interest to have such a system.
There were some interesting things that Drew Hernandez did say in his like squirming around, talking about police officers not really knowing what the law is. And I think it is valuable to talk with police officers and see what their perspective is. I mean, of course, if we're going to politely walk them through the logic of it, if they care about that again. But it is interesting just to comment, I didn't make this announcement on the show, Keith, but I quit my last job and I started my own law firm. And now, so I'm taking criminal cases and family law cases. So this is a big deal for me, but I'll be dealing more with criminal law. And he's talking about police officers not really knowing what the law is, which is kind of a cop-out answer in that aspect. But it's an interesting point because there's this thing called, I think it's the fruit of the poisonous tree, when like a well-meaning mistake, and I need to brush up on the law area, but if the officer has a well-meaning mistake of law, we won't throw out the evidence he found by breaking the law. Does that make sense? So if he thinks the law is one thing and he stops you based on something he in good faith thinks is illegal, but it is not illegal, if he believed it in good faith and it's like reasonable that he made the mistake, we'll still let that evidence come in. So if the stop was based on like, he stops your car, it's a well-meaning mistake, he didn't actually have authority to stop your car, but when he stops your car, he found like a bag of meth. Well, we can forgive him not knowing the law if it was a good faith mistake, and we'll let that evidence come in. And it's like he's talking about, you had mentioned something about, would that woman be justified in resisting, the woman who has like the illegal gun? Would she be justified in resisting? Well, what is the only remedy that we really have for police officers who violate the Fourth Amendment is that we will throw out the evidence that they find if they violate the Fourth Amendment. And it's like, yeah, if they stop you for like having a gun, there is no recourse for it. It seems like the only recourse is throwing out the evidence. So just an observation there.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the wording of, so he was specifically asked about the Second Amendment. So let's take the John Hasness legal approach to this, where he says, let's find something real simple, top of, the Constitution, everyone's heard of it, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the idea that there was something called objective law, and there's something that cops either know or don't know, well, there is a wide range of interpretation for a lot of those things. You can even look at Antonin Scalia and Stephen Breyer debating about whether or not the right to discriminate is violated through any affirmative action legislation. So Breyer would say something like, well, yes, it technically, the law says you can't judge people differently based on race, and this judges people differently based on race, but this is trying to help people. It's not like we're trying to oppress or hurt anyone. And Scalia almost laughs and says, well, what do you think they were saying back then? This is, we need to do this because it's bad and we're bad people. That's always the guise of whenever anyone's trying to do anything. You can, the mind's ability to justify its actions is just unbelievable. So for him to say, I think cops need to have a better understanding of the law. One of the great understandings I think you have to have is that the idea of objective law and whether you're following it or not following it is so difficult to understand. So you have to have cops that have much more of, I don't want to say a philosophical mind because that's asking too high of an entry requirement for, a job that you would want a lot of people to have in any society. You'd want a lot of people to, sort of be your security force more or less. But anyone who believes in this idea that there is the law and you're either following it or obeying or disobeying it, you have to look at how, Julian Assange, was he engaged in free speech? Was he reporting a crime? Well, they've certainly kidnapped him for going on almost a decade now. So I think the myth of the rule of law is so important because it almost gives the state this sanctity of there's the law and they follow it and this is legitimate. And you go, no, it's more of like a general rule that basically they don't even agree upon. The Second Amendment, that not everyone agrees, and the First Amendment, they don't all agree. So what do you think that tells us about laws that are like 20,000 pages long, Obamacare or Build Back Better? You think there's an objective analysis? Well, there isn't. And that's one of the great things in demystifying the state that, he would never say, well, it depends on if Walmart's following their rules or not. He would still have objective measurements for whether or not Walmart has the right to steal from their customers. Well, I'd have to see what their policy is. I'd have to know more about it. That would never happen. And that's why the myth of the rule of law is just so dangerous, because people believe it like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that even Drew Hernandez can identify that. Like, he accidentally, and he accidentally stumbles upon something that's very profound. And I do believe it's completely by accident, you know. But Malice got that out of him. So, I mean, maybe it's more props to Malice.
Yeah. Are you familiar? I think there's a concept called modern authority in law that it's something like I think Thomas Sowell makes the argument in Civil Rights Rhetoric or Reality, where he says that, any laws that are not in the Constitution weren't put in because they weren't needed. So now you should have the authority because now it's more of a problem when you're dealing with things like segregated state schools at the time. So in other words, this legal principle that was, I want to say Wendell Holmes or something, but whatever, it was embraced at the level of the Supreme Court. So in other words, think of all the leeway that this would give every cop, every lawyer, and every judge. So again, we're even further removed from the idea of the objective law. You're either following it or not. Because there's no such thing, you basically more or less, it's more reliable to just rely on your moral intuition than laws that no one agrees on what they say. And even when we finally pin it down, they can use the modern authority argument of that was then and this is now.
Yeah. And I mean, I was going to mention that you have this problem of just the multitude of laws that are out there. It's like any pretext that you want for pulling someone over. It's like, I have a client who was arrested because he was driving under while revoked, and the stop, he was stopped initially because the police officer says that he clearly saw he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I mean, I suspect that he was just pulled over because, you know, maybe the cop knew who he was, but then again, the cop could say that, or knew that he was revoked. So I'm just gamifying it in my head, but at the same time, there's just so many laws on the books that how do you get all of them straight? And like you said, that is a profound point that Hasness makes, is that there is no objective answer really in the law. And yeah, Hernandez stumbles upon that. So, hey everyone, and welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. Your one-stop shop is libertyweekly.net/support. And once you're there, you can see all the different ways to support my content. There is a Amazon wish list there you can check out. There's also a PayPal button, paypal.me/libertyweekly for one-time donations. There's also a Patreon button and a Subscribestar button where you can donate on a monthly basis in exchange for the bonus content that I do offer. So go check those out. There's an archive there with actually hundreds of posts going back years, and you get all access to all those things with your donation. There's also cryptocurrency addresses there with all the addresses for the cryptocurrencies that I accept. If you don't see one there you'd like to donate, just get in touch with me. And if you want access to bonus content but you don't want to pay a monthly fee, you can go over to Odyssey, libertyweekly.net/Odyssey, ODYSEE, and you can purchase my bonus content there a la carte, and you can purchase it for LBC, which is the cryptocurrency that the website runs on. The best deal for subscribing and getting my premium content, though, is to go to Rokfin.com, ROKFIN. You can, for $10 a month, get access to tons of your favorite creators. And you also get access to my premium content there as well. And there's a lot of great creators there that you can check out on the screen here. But for you listening in the audio version, Last American Vagabond, Monica Perez and Brad Binkley from the Propaganda Report, Joanne Leone from Around the Empire, Kyle Anzalone as well from the Libertarian Institute. Just a whole bunch of people. Whitney Webb from Unlimited Hangout. So go check that out. One monthly subscription gets you access to all of that. And if you like my writing, I do sometimes release blog posts that don't end up on the Libertarian Institute on my Substack/Substack. So you can go check that out as well and see some of my writings for my email list. And of course, the Liberty Weekly podcast appears on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org, alongside other fine podcasts, Scott Horton, Pete Quinones, A Free Man Beyond the Wall, Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone, Don't Tread on Anyone with Keith Knight, my show, and also Year Zero with Tommy Salmons. So go check out those other fine podcasts and help support the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org. Thanks, everybody, and back to the show. Well, you want to move on to the 23 things?
Yes, I think we've beaten on Mr. Hernandez enough.
No, I think that's great, though. So we'll go over to, you want to kind of introduce this work?
So I saw this book a long time ago. It's called 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. And I remember it made a big splash at the time because, of course, he writes it after the '08 financial crisis. And when talking about a large financial crisis, didn't really find it important to mention the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money. Of course, he's very, very stunning and brave to mention that any potential monopolies in the voluntary sector, well, those are pure evil. Coercive monopolies by legal fiat, well, that's kind of how things work. It's kind of cool. They can just type in whatever. Isn't that interesting? So again, totally high standards for the voluntary sector, no standards for the mass murdering government. That I remember that this was one of the big things making its rounds at the time. I have not heard of this guy since then, though. But yeah, basically the table of contents alone lays out the things. The book is 378 pages. I tried to find so much as a definition of his free market or capitalism, a term that he does use those terms interchangeably when he's criticizing capitalism. Even though he says, well, there's many differences. There's American capitalism, Scandinavian. Well, that's the purpose of defining, so we don't have an infinite interpretation. But he didn't think it's too important to make sure we know what he's talking about for almost 400 pages. So what I thought we could do is just address these things one by one. And yeah, what do you have any overall takes? And you want to lead us in with the first thing?
Yeah, well, I can lead us in. Well, I mean, just off the bat, there's no such thing as a free market. And again, I guess it depends on your definition, but if he doesn't define things, as you say, I mean, so Keith and I get together and we say, hey, I have widgets and you have cryptocurrency. I desire more cryptocurrency than I desire the widgets that I have. And so we both consent and agree on a price of cryptocurrency for a set number of widgets, and there's no force that stops us or comes in between us. I mean, I would say that that's a free market exchange, wouldn't you?
Exactly. And I think Nozick just nails it with his term, capitalist acts between consenting adults. Because really, whether a product or a service or money is involved or it's just our time, it still is the same thing. For the reason I don't support outlawing homosexuality. But what if there's AIDS, and what if it leads to the denigration of family, and what if people are all gay and no one reproduces and then the human race goes extinct? You know what? I get that those are all potential problems, but I think they're overblown, and I support people's right to own their own bodies. So even like all this doom and gloom nonsense, just apply it to the social setting of your life. When he says there's no such thing as a free market, all he's saying is our point is that the state has poisoned literally everything in society. So there is no place where the state actually is. I'll use Rothbard's definition of a free market. I can't find a date on this article. I mean, it was published by Mises in 2019. But obviously was written many moons before that. Rothbard says the free market is a summary term for an array of exchanges that take place in society. Each exchange is undertaken as a voluntary agreement between two people or between two groups of people represented by agents. These two individuals or agents exchange two economic goods, either tangible commodities or non-tangible services. So the free market just indicating a large array of exchanges that are voluntary and mutually agreed upon. The fact that he doesn't differentiate between those it's like no wonder everything else is poison. When you build your house on water, well, you can't expect anything to stand once you have such a terrible foundation.
And perhaps, I don't know, maybe the argument is that there literally is nothing that the state doesn't touch. Like, that's an argument that libertarians will make, is that absolutely everything in the physical world, the state is so permanent and ever present that nothing that you touch or do is untouched by the state in any way. Is that his point? I guess like any economy of scale that you would have, the state would get involved and intervene in some way. But I think that's a testament to the existence of the state. The fundamental free exchange still takes place and can take place.
Well, it's the 1619 Project argument of racism existed. It was on a large scale. Therefore, if a butterfly effect affects the history of the world, think of how big this institution affected. So literally everything you could blame on slavery, just as you can blame everything on cars, because everything that exists, this conversation, well, someone drove the laptop I'm using to the Best Buy so I could buy it. So therefore cars are, there's no such thing as a non-car market. Well, yeah, there's no such thing as a non-Christian market, because Christianity hasn't affected so much of everything, and Judaism and Buddhism and Islam has affected so much that it's impossible to imagine a world without it. So freaking what? That's not even the example he uses is, think of when you go to return things. That's more often than not the state requiring that happens, but people don't appreciate it. So you think this thing is a free market, but really it only exists because there's this overarching state protecting us all. The number one cause of mass murder and genocide is protecting us all.
That's like what the NATO's 60-year period of peace. Have you heard that term in foreign policy? Like, maybe you'd see that in the foreign policy journal, like the what is that?
That seems like a foreign affairs statement.
Yeah, a foreign affairs statement. Yeah. So, or this whole idea that there's no such thing as intrastate commerce, because everything is interstate commerce, even if you like grow grain in your field and you harvest it and you don't sell it to anyone.
That affects that affects the price of other goods and services. So therefore, it's interstate commerce. Yeah, I remember that was in, I think it was under FDR's administration where the Supreme Court decided on that one. But I remember Larkin Rose writing about that and just being blown away. I go, wow, they really can get any law to say anything they want. Interstate commerce is you growing something in your backyard. Yeah, so there's no such thing as a free market. It's just a dumb, useless statement. As useless as there's no such thing as non-Christianity, because Christianity affects everything. It's not a justification. It's just an observation that big institutions have large-scale effects.
I think in a way that's brilliant that you can weave this thread, this illogical thread through everything, but that you can make up such a bogus argument like the intrastate commerce clause and justify it anyway. So... well, thing number 2, companies should not be run in the interest of their owners. So this is kind of like that whole stakeholder capitalism idea that's starting to pick up traction. Did you want to lead us off on that one, Keith?
Well, I don't know what in their interest means. Of course, there is the idea that even if you are volunteering for $0.00 an hour, it's in your self-interest. You want the social status that comes with being a volunteer. You like the feeling of helping people. By helping people, you make them dependent on you, therefore increasing the amount of power you have. This was Bismarck's idea of a welfare state. So the idea that we are able to determine what is in someone's interest is very, very difficult. Of course, in this, he's simply assuming people want more money and that's in their interest. Well, not always. Don't people have families? Those families are pretty costly. I'm not sure. Would you say that not having kids is in someone's interest since it's so costly? Or having a wife who stays home? That also seems very costly. Of course, he doesn't know what's in other people's interest. And they don't have to be run for the interest of their owners. They're more often run for the interest of their customers so they can attract customers and give them products and services they want so they can have more money. It's no different than saying employees work for the benefit of employees because they only go to work so they can get money and so they can buy stuff. And customers, they just act in their own self-interest. They don't love me. They just come to my store because I have products and services that they, that they exploit off of me. They just use me. This is terrible. No, it's actually nothing bad at all. What do you hear when you hear companies should not be run in the interest of their owners?
I mean, I don't even know, man. It's like, if they're not running the interest of the owners, who would they be running the interest of? And I think, I don't know, everything that you said is 100% on point. They are run in the interest of their consumers as well, by necessity. But at the same time, incentives matter. And I think that there's discussions to be had about, mutualists having their cooperatives and things like that. But the incentive, this is 100% right here, Keith, is I just started my own law firm. And it's like, now when I'm working, I have my overhead, but I know for a fact that every hour I work and every hour that I bill is going almost directly into my pocket. And the incentive for that and the consciousness of me knowing that makes an incredible world of difference, just in my own personal experience. So that's anecdotal, but at the same time, I think that the power of it really can change things. So
just think, like, if you go into a job interview and one of the questions that they'll often ask is, you're attending the phones for our customers, and someone calls, how do you answer that phone? Just to get an idea to see how professional and courteous you are. If you answer it and say,
hey, bitch.
And you say, what do you idiots want? What do you greedy customers want who just want products and services? You're so self-interested. You think the company would care? Or if you just called the customers pieces of trash, or you were rude, or just sometimes you said, I'm hanging up on you, goodbye. Do they have a preference whether you're rude or kind? Because in the socialist worldview, they don't care. They would just be really rude to customers for no reason, because there's no incentive to please customers. A profit seeker just reaps profits. They don't come from anywhere. It's just intergenerational wealth. Of course not. Every company would say, let's have good customer service so we could incentivize them to come back. This is the harmonious aspect of the free market that, as great as Blockbuster was for so many years, yet sometimes they're not invincible. And this freedom of disassociation and reallocation of resources is a much better correcting mechanism than voting every 4 years between two lying psychopaths.
Yeah, and Dave Smith always had a good point that I think translates well to people who aren't, Mises fellows. It's just that it's like, okay, well, I need a cab from JFK back to my apartment in, the West Side. I don't know. And like, I'm a Jew and the cab driver is Palestinian or something like that. Like, but I get in the car, I say, good day. Can you take me to this place? The guy takes me to that place and I give him money and we leave happy. It's the market brings people together in that way. So I think that's a great point.
And not only does the market bring people together, the state divides them. The opposite of that is true. So let's say the Palestinian is not just from Palestine, but he's a believer in Islam. Well, could you imagine if you could either only trade with people who are your religion or the state-determined religion by popular vote? I mean, this guy, the author of this, I have trouble pronouncing his name, but he should support a national religion. This way we have the right religion. That's just government regulating spirituality. This way no one's taken advantage of. Well, just as religion would poison the state and vice versa, well, when you get scientists with the state, they get poisoned. When you merge law and the state, both are more poisonous than they otherwise would be. Worse quality and higher prices.
Okay, so next thing here, most people in rich countries are paid more than they should be, and maybe we should pick up the pace a little bit because we have a few, unless we want to cut it off somewhere. But these are all good points. I mean, good things to dive into. So I always hear this a lot. People will say like, oh, athletes are paid way too much money, and all they do is, they're bums and they just play a game and they get paid to do it, and that sucks. Well, I mean, I guess I usually make the point that it's like, okay, well, yes, there is a relationship between subsidized industries and sports. Like all the stadiums are subsidized by the government and they get paid to do propagandistic patriotic displays and whatnot. So it's not like it is untouched by the state, and it's not like they're getting paid the exact amount that they should be. But again, it's not up to us. It's up to the market to decide what these athletes are worth. And I think that, people support sports teams with their dollars, and that's what the market for players with that specialized skill to compete at a high level is what determines those athletes' performance. And exactly so for every other person. I guess you could say maybe the CEOs of Northrop Grumman or Boeing, maybe they are getting paid way more than they should be. But what do you think about that, Keith?
Yeah, it's the equivalent of saying Leonardo DiCaprio gets more viewers on his movies than he deserves. I don't know what people deserve. All I think is that people should be interacting voluntarily. Talk about being overpaid. The government gets $5 trillion a year to make us less safe and brainwashes the public. You think they're a little overpaid? Politicians lie to us for a living, and they're all in the top 1%. You think that's getting overpaid? Also, it's just none of your business. Stop worrying about what other people. That guy's getting too much attention. We need a regulatory state to give some attention to me and away from him. And this group has too many views on YouTube. We need to redistribute them because they're impacting society disproportionately with having such a big microphone. The founders never could have envisioned such a internet that allows you to talk to people. That was not the intention of the First Amendment. So we should repeal it. All these arguments are trash. Look, yeah, I'm happy to get through these as fast as possible. I'll try to speed it up here.
Okay, well, we'll share the screen here. So assume the washing machine has changed the world more than the internet has. What do you think about that? What's his point there?
I had totally forgotten about that one. Either way, don't let the state run the washing machines. I would think that he says that something much more intimate that is necessary for human well-being, the cleanliness of clothes and sanitation, is much more valuable than something like the internet, which is not necessary for survival and can do a lot of damage.
Huh. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, maybe for women's liberation, it made a big deal. Not bigger than the internet. I don't know. So, okay. So assume the worst about people and you get the worst. What do you think about that?
I totally believe that. I'm not sure how that can be an argument against capitalism. You could say, well, that applies to government. They assume we can't build mutual aid societies. They give us welfare states. Stop assuming the worst of us, government. We can act voluntarily. We can help one another without the coercive state. So stop assuming the worst of us. You can just take his premise and flip it around in almost all these.
I hear that a lot. It's like, we can't not have a government. We have to have a government because people are inherently bad. And without the government to come in and regulate people's behavior and to stop, some people from taking advantage or taking over, that's what we need. I've heard that a lot. So,
yeah, and I don't know what species they want running the government if people are greedy.
Yeah. So
if people are greedy, don't give them the right to monopolize law.
Greater macroeconomic stability has not made the world economy more stable.
When you give people a monopoly on the money supply by legal fiat, they have no interest to stabilize the economy. Money's half of every transaction. Therefore, states having central banks is the greatest threat to stability.
This goes back to like a fundamental thing I learned when I started learning about Austrian economics, is that there's no such thing as macroeconomics. Is that if, why would macroeconomic principles not align with microeconomic principles? That just doesn't logically follow to me. So the next one, free market policies rarely make poor countries rich.
Oh, shut up. Yes, of course they do. The best examples would be taking a country prior to drastic increases in free market transactions. So this would be China before 1979, drastic increase in private property, the ability to trade freely. Of course, nowhere close to ideal. India since 1991, you have an example there of a drastic increase in wealth. Korea, the Korean Peninsula, more or less was equal in both the North and the South, but one geographical area got significantly wealthier than the other in a 70-year period. You have East Germany and West Germany as an example, to which the Richard Wolffs of this world have finally responded to by saying, well, East Germany didn't have a lot of natural resources. They still believe this lie. Places like Hong Kong and Holland got wealthy because of trade policies that incentivized people to bring goods and services to those areas. Natural resources are not what makes countries wealthy, as Adam Smith discovered when he was analyzing the economies of Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands. So no, that's a lie.
And this one kind of dovetails off of it. He says capital has a nationality. And I assume, like, as I've studied like foreign policy a bit more, I've always had to add like these caveats to things, because I'm sure that you'll recall when you and I started doing our shows, one of the bigger points is that, oh, well, Venezuela proves that socialism can't work, right? And then the leftist counter was, okay, well, what about U.S. interventionism in Venezuela? Like, it's not a smoking gun kind of thing. And like, I've become a little more sympathetic to that argument, because it's true that the U.S. policy has a large effect on these third world countries. And I assume that is that a point that he makes in thing number 8, capital has a nationality?
Well, if we just take the concept of one country sanctioning another, first of all, it proves that they need access to much more of a free market in order for their less free market to work. You'd think capitalism is just exploitation and it's unproductive and parasitic. Well, you'd want to be as far away from that as possible, wouldn't you?
Right.
And how is a sanction different than a regulation? Aren't they just regulating us and making sure we're safe? No, they're foreign regulations. It's the same thing. But just like the Dave Smith argument of Somalia, it's not that Somalia was a shining city on the hill before the George Bush supporting the Ethiopian invasion in the early 2000s. It's ridiculous to say that, things would be good if it just wasn't for this government intervention. Yes, that's terrible and parasitic, but the main overall reason Somalia and Venezuela and Cuba are poor is they don't have stable regimes. They don't have a general rule of law. They don't have open free markets, and they don't have a general recognition of the private property ethic. Those are the 4 main institutions that make countries rich. Countries that have those are wealthy. Countries that don't aren't. So and also it looks like, you can have things that are really good, but if one country ever invades you, then everything goes to hell. Well, then that means the free market is like so dumb and unstable that if one little thing happens, well, then nothing else counts. And Somalia would be, I used to say New York City as an example of a nice place to live, but after de Blasio and the riots and the mandates, I will now say Miami instead. We have to both pin it on the bad actors, but also recognize there's a much bigger overarching issue.
Definitely. So we do not live in a post-industrial age.
All right, fine. But we live in an agricultural age or a service industry age. Make interactions voluntary. I don't know what he means by that. He needs to make these points better before I risk, 10 hours reading a 400-page book.
The U.S. does not have the highest living standard in the world.
That I am open to believing, considering the U.S. is also not the freest market in the world. I think they're close to like the 20th position as far as the Fraser Institute's measure of economic freedom index goes. It's always companies like Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, those Singapore, those places are always at the top. Singapore, talk about a poor country becoming rich as a causal result of embracing free market ideas.
So Africa is not destined for underemployment. And I think, in a way, I think good.
Underdevelopment.
Oh, sorry. Underdevelopment. Yeah. So that's thing number 11. Africa is not destined for underdevelopment. And I think on one hand, I'm like, okay, that's good because, I want Africa to be a thriving place for free market, for prosperity. But at the same time, like, are we talking about IMF development, like in Yemen, where they come in and they condition these loans on growing cash crops instead of sustenance? What do you think?
I would just refer to the four bullet points I mentioned earlier of why some countries are wealthy and others aren't. Ghana and Ivory Coast are another North and South Korea example in Africa where, I forgot which country embraced which. Either way, after the British Empire had sort of recalled a large portion of their African colonies, Ghana embraced a much more interventionist policy than the Ivory Coast. Very similar populations, very similar access to natural resources, and after 20 years, you could tell a distinct difference between the wealth in those two societies. So yeah, of course that's true, and we know because of the examples of Ghana and Ivory Coast picking different systems to live under, or the regimes at least picked them.
So governments can pick winners.
The Koch brothers can pick winners. Doesn't mean they should. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have the right to opt out. Nonsense statement.
Making rich people richer doesn't make the rest of us richer.
Correct. The government handing out trillions doesn't make the rest of us richer. It's not the richness that is the good thing. It's whether or not they create products and services that people want and are willing to exchange a lot of money for.
U.S. managers are overpriced. We kind of tackled that one already.
Authors criticizing capitalism are overpriced.
People in poor countries are more entrepreneurial than people in rich countries.
That I believe, just because you have to come up with more ideas of how to create wealth with less access to capital development. In the same way, you're stronger if you spend your life swimming against the tide. I went to Mexico and there was like this 5-year-old girl selling oranges, and I remember thinking, gosh, that's kind of sad. And I go, well, it's still better than my first grade class, so maybe this is not on net totally terrible. But yeah, that's fine. That doesn't disprove the reason that interactions should be voluntary.
I hate this one. We are not smart enough to leave things to the market.
We're going to have to do a separate episode on this. Please respond to this one.
I mean, it's precisely because people are not smart enough that we have to leave things to the market. No one is smart enough to centrally plan an economy, so we need the anarchy of production. I mean...
Well, then you got to take away people's right to vote. I mean, that they're not smart.
Right.
Obviously, you need a monarchy. And if we have a monarchy, well, the monarch is probably not going to be like a tiger or an owl. It's probably also going to be a person. And people aren't smart enough to make those large-scale decisions for hundreds of millions of strangers. So can't have democracy or monarchy or oligarchy. We should probably just have a free market and let the process of competition and free association decide things. Yeah, but people are ignorant, as if our knowledge of politics is perfect. But whether or not this monster is going to kill me, that's where we got to allocate a lot of regulations to.
More education in itself is not going to make a country richer. I don't know if I disagree with that.
I've been saying that for decades.
Yeah.
When they've said, "Well, schools need more money." No, they don't.
Nope. What is good for General Motors is not necessarily good for the United States.
Which is about as dumb as saying which is good for Hispanics is not necessarily good for all Arizonans. Yeah, that's why you want to make interactions harmonious, where General Motors can't get a penny out of my pocket unless I voluntarily give it to them. If they have access to a regime that gets bailouts, well, then what's good for them is in conflict with what's good for me or their potential customers. But even if I never act with General Motors and I only buy Toyota, well, my Toyota is better knowing that General Motors is a competitor. So I'm still reaping benefits from General Motors, even if I never work there or never shop there.
Despite the fall of communism, we are still living in planned economies. And I think that's
take this
true.
one off my hands.
What's that?
Take this one off my hands, please.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's obviously true. I mean, I think we've lived in planned economies for a long time. Do you disagree with that?
No, I agree. And that's what we're criticizing.
Yeah.
It's not like we live in unplanned economies and we're doing shows about the lack of planning needed. No, they are planned. That's the sad part.
Equality of opportunity may not be fair.
Government having the right to rule the rest of us isn't fair. Equality of opportunity, it's completely unachievable because people are born into different households, and government trying to make us all equal is an unequal method of achieving something that could never exist. I don't know. I guess they still believe the same nonsense. It's just as impossible to achieve as equality of outcome. So what you want is a system that gives the most people the most amount of potential opportunities, which would be one of competition, private property, and free association.
How about big government makes people more open to change? I think that's because they have to be, because you have one party in control, every 4 years, and then that changes, and then everything changes.
I don't know, is being open to change a good thing? Maybe. I thought people are really stupid and can't be trusted. So if they're constantly willing to change things, well, aren't they going to change things for the worse since they're so ignorant by every metric? I don't know the right equilibrium level of change. Should things never change? Should they change every single day about every single topic? Should we learn a new language every 48 hours? Well, I'm not sure. That sort of equilibrium is why you need a process of profit and loss and freedom of association.
Financial markets need to become less, not more efficient. I don't even know what the argument for that would be.
I think the concept is, if you put more hurdles in the way of the financial system, yes, it can't make as many transactions as it previously could, but that's overall good because there would be less recessions.
And he doesn't mention the Federal Reserve at all?
That is not. If you read the first portion of the book, which I only made it through the very first 20 pages, it's just not worth that much time. I got other stuff to read. In his explanation of the 2008 financial crash, he doesn't mention easy credit. He doesn't mention the Federal Reserve. He doesn't mention Community Reinvestment Act. He doesn't mention things like Sarbanes-Oxley, which drastically decreased the amount of companies that could be in the Dow Jones traded on the NASDAQ or anything else. It didn't hurt any of the rich people that were able to make it, but it certainly made it harder for startups to get their foot in the door. So yeah, regulations make things less stable. But then again, stability isn't necessarily good. You could say North Korea is stable. If men had the right to rule women, that there would be stability. Is that even something that's desirable? So yeah, 2 minutes ago, we need government because people need to be open to change. And also, we can't have much change in the financial sector. It has to be heavily regulated. This, of course, is the great Bitcoin needs regulation justification because it could be volatile as opposed to the U.S. dollar, which has never changed the amount of value that it's held. Right.
Yeah. Well, the last and final one is good economic policy does not require good economists. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, it's economists just try to plan the economy.
I would say a lot of economists are detrimental to they constantly come up with justifications of things that would otherwise be ridiculous. I mean, what gave Jen Psaki the confidence to say the 3.5 trillion Build Back Better 1.0 version of the legislation will cost $0? And Nancy Pelosi said it, and then Joe Biden's Twitter account tweeted it out. It's not like all the economists got together and condemned such ridiculous nonsense, and the mathematicians, I guess, should have called her out. So yeah, it's terrible economists that he thinks are actually beneficial. I think that hurts us more. Whereas I guess if people never had heard of economic exchange, opportunity cost. So when I say, read this Man, Economy, and State with Power and Market edition book, they say no, because it's not worth their time. Well, the concept of worth, cost, and benefit is them economizing immediately. So yeah, you can have people that are efficient in their lives without ever hearing the words economics praxeology.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, damn. Well, that's the end of the 23. But I think that was vintage Patrick MacFarlane, Keith Knight right there. Now to take on the portion where we just bullshit a little bit and just talk. So what have you been working on this year, man? It's a good transition. You came out with a lot of content.
Well, the big thing is a secret that hopefully people will know about soon. The problem is I have made promise. I made a promise in the past that I was sadly not able to deliver on. So I'm very trigger shy when it comes to telling people what I am working on. But as far as things that I can say, let me just see if I could bring up my, oh heavens, where is it? All right, I got my channel right here. In the last year, I have been doing a lot of focusing on propaganda analysis, just because once your defaults change to where you're able to see through the scumbaggery of the state, then it's not like, oh, well, terrorism's the new thing, so you have to memorize the talking points about why the libertarians are right about the war on terror, and then remember why they're right about education, and then healthcare, and then the environment. There's always going to be a new scam that they come up with. Who would have thought that they would have funded gain of function research to create a virus that justified a drastic increase in government power and spending? I wouldn't have thought of that. So if you're able to think critically, like people like Brian Kaplan, Jason Brennan, Michael Humer, those things, once you're able to conquer sort of that seeing through the propaganda, then I think you're just dynamite. And that's why I've been obsessed with that. And also the Second World War. The significance being that is the good war, the one that they constantly brag about. Giving half of Europe to Stalin and giving him Poland on a war that started for Polish independence was not a net benefit, turns out. Of course, the argument's much deeper than that. But yeah, that is what I'm pretty much focused on my end. How about you?
Yeah, ever since I started making, like, I think it was you, and I'll always be grateful to you for this, because you've always been like one of my friends that will encourage me when I'm getting burnt out. And I think that you gave me the kick in the ass to start making videos again when I restarted, because I had a hiatus and I was away for a while. And then I think this was in 2020 when I started coming back and making videos. And it was when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. You remember that?
Yes, I remember that there was a big debate on whether or not Trump was faking not knowing. And I remember thinking, why am I spending so much time on something so trivial? But I remember being obsessed with it. Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, and I just felt like I had to come back, and it was COVID. Everything was going on with COVID, and it was just it was like, this is so important that at this critical juncture in history, I can't just sit on the sidelines while all this happens. And so, like, I've just tried to increase my production value and then come up with really good guests and try and focus on these deep dive documentaries. But it's like, so I put out that the Uyghur genocide debunking documentary kind of thing. And I love content like that, but it's so time consuming. Like, it'd be really great, to put out stuff like James Corbett does. But that's what I've kind of focused on. And then I've really focused on learning more about foreign policy, because I think it's very important, and parallel to what's happening with the COVID-19, the ginned up panic for that, we also have like the United States entering a new paradigm where we're returning to the Cold War right now. And I think that should be a lot more alarming to a lot more people than it currently is. And it makes me worry about the next, 20, 30 years. even like as much, if not more than COVID itself. Just the danger of this confrontationalism, knowing what militarism brings is an even bigger crackdown on civil liberties, more spending, more, the empire falling apart. And it comes with the added bonus of the fact that we could possibly enter nuclear Armageddon at any moment. So it's like every person has a finite well of things that they can care about and that they have time to care about and become educated on. And especially in foreign policy, it's like, oh, shit, I'm worried about, there was this coup that happened in Haiti. And, oh, yeah, well, we're still committing genocide in Yemen. And there's these things to look about in China and Taiwan. And then now there's a Ukrainian crisis. And then now, like, the JCPOA is, like, we're trying to get a deal done, but it's just not, well, we're roadblocking it. I just don't know enough about it, but I think we're roadblocking it, and that's dragged on. And now Israel's planning like an invasion of Iran or planning attacks on Iran. It's like in each one of those topics is like double-digit investment of time to figure out what the hell is going on. The barrier to entry is so high, and it's just so hard, having 2 kids and now starting my own business and doing the show at the same time.
Yeah, man. Well, you're definitely still putting out valuable stuff. Even I saw that James Corbett put you on his weekly recommendations for the Uyghur genocide thing. The problem is you never know what's going to take off.
Yeah.
I've done episodes where I go, oh, this is more of like an ANCAP sort of specific episode that's sort of preaching to the choir, but I think it'll be worth doing. And I got so many people saying, I was curious about voluntarism, but this show really made me consider it. Just a discussion of different legal systems got people thinking that the state shouldn't monopolize it, which in retrospect, of course, yeah, that could be beneficial. You never know what's going to take off. You never know what's really going to strike a chord with people. So, I appreciate anyone who shares the stuff, who donates to either us directly or the Libertarian Institute, because the fight is rough, but I do like getting the emails and stuff of people letting us know that they appreciate it. It does give the email a little more credibility when it comes with a little donation, like the price of a movie ticket for all the videos that we've given. That's a bit more of a dopamine rush, but hey, I'm just glad that people are watching and sharing.
Yeah, I always try to, like, when someone takes the time to send me an email, I try and respond. And it's sometimes they hit me at a bad time when it's like in the middle of the week and there's so much going on and stuff like that. Just hard to come back to. But I always try. I think people who have emailed me have gotten several paragraphs back because I just like vomit on the page, But no, I really do appreciate hearing from people and knowing that people do, watch and that it changes minds and that they have time to consider the ideas that we're presenting here for sure. But any other themes? I mean, aside from your work, like, is 2021 the year of blank?
Nothing jumps out at me. I can be so pessimistic with where things are going for the COVID regime and the amount of people complying. But then again, there's so many people protesting, and what do we have to compare it to? If you and I are living in 1917, we'd go, oh, it's all over. The U.S. has now lied with the Lusitania strike, getting us into this global conflict. There's mass enslavement called conscription. There's going to be tons of death. Husbands losing their limbs and wives being miserable and kids growing up without dads. It's basically over. Or even the Second World War. Oh, communism's going to take over half of Europe, Russia, China, North Korea. It's going to spread to the universities. It's over. You really could have said it's over so many freaking times, but not now. On 9/11, you can watch Howard Stern's that 9/11 episode where he had the morning show. So as the planes were hitting the towers. It's like, things are changing now. We don't know. We're getting reports of attacks in Cleveland. Oh, that didn't work out. You didn't know what was going on. It was so terrifying. Howard Stern, the kind progressive liberal, was saying that we should nuke countries off the face of the earth. And the problem with America is we're way too lax in this country. Of course, had no idea about Iraqi sanctions or blowback or the possibility of, false flags and FBI informants. But there's so many examples where you could have said everything's going to hell that I think 2021 could be the year of the ultimate white pill, black pill confusion. That's my weaselly answer of saying I don't know.
Man, now we're gonna my thing was like mass red pilling, I suppose. Now we're falling into the cliche of like using the term red pill and white pill and black pill. But I
sometimes they fit.
They do fit. It's just it's a useful like tool to use. But yeah, I mean, just people waking up. I think I've noticed a lot of people waking up, and maybe it's a circumstance of where I live that people are a bit more receptive to alternative ideas, but people considering things that I didn't think they would consider ever. That just the trust in the government and the trust in the narrative being completely thrown out the window. And at the same time, people like Dan Crenshaw and conservatives voting to fund this federal vaccine database. Did you hear about that?
Yes. It was like, 80 senators voted for it.
Yeah.
Just unreal.
I guess we'll add that to the black pill column.
But then again, the white pill could be there was a report that hackers in Brazil got a hold of the database and erased it. That Anonymous got a hold of it and erased it. So again, even this terrible, evil thing there still are counter measures. There's still the Saudi agorists of the world motivating people in the black market and gray markets to counteract this tyranny. And maybe if it gets worse, other people would get more motivated. I think that's a great position in the division of labor that we play, is that we could just piss off people indiscriminately. It's not like, we just have to focus on this group. Well, let's make sure the hackers sort of hate the state. Let's get the farmers to hate the state and be willing to sell food that would have been legalized if the Prime Act by Thomas Massey had passed, which drastically, by every metric, would have lowered the price of food and the cost of things like beef, because it would have introduced many more options to many more people, drastically increasing the supply and access that people in lower incomes had to things like grass-fed beef. So the point is that once you indiscriminately give this message to so many people, well, maybe some pilots are going to hear it and they're going to, walk out on, like they did on Southwest, or the sanitation workers in New York City are going to finally get fed up because they have been hearing, some anti-government stuff, and they're willing to trash Bill de Blasio's residency. If you remember, they were tossing trash into, whatever the mayor's residency is, or the governor's.
That was cool.
We just never know. We just never know. You have to spend 1,000 years talking about how cool it would be to fly before the Wright brothers build a plane, and now we're all flying with relative ease. But you just don't know. So the best thing you can do is put your head down and be the person you hope your future kids will look up to and say, hey, they really did the right thing.
Yeah, I hope so. And I hope that, it doesn't come off weird to say it feels like this is maybe the closest thing that we've had in our, certainly in our lifetimes, to like a Great Depression kind of thing. And not to say that those are equivalent. I'm just making a comparison. But the other thing is inflation, is that the concept of inflation is becoming mainstream. People talking about it at social gatherings, anecdotally, just that I've been to, is that people notice it. Now, whether it's because they actually feel it in their checkbook or because they're watching TV and people mention inflation on TV. But I do think, the CPI has gone up, and you and I both know, and our audience probably knows, that the CPI the measurements for the CPI vastly understate what the real inflation is. But people are feeling that, and this concept of inflation is becoming mainstream. Although, as Austrians, we probably know that inflation, people measure inflation, they say that it's rising prices, but it really is an increase in the money supply.
Yeah, I actually had a good conversation on Thanksgiving about, I was actually asked why I think the prices are rising. And I opened with these are people I care about. So I was actually willing to explain it. I'm not saying this is the best way to go. With people I don't care about, I go, yeah, governments monopolize the currency. Of course it's going to go to hell. What do you think? We need a free marketing currency, just like everything else. And that at least will plant a seed of, oh, monopoly bad, government associated with monopoly. So I'm not sure. I'm open to suggestions about a more productive, one-liner elevator pitch. But at Thanksgiving, I was actually thanked by, let's just say, people that are not exactly favorable to my worldview here. I explained the water diamond paradox of how you can get something necessary for life, water, to be relatively available at a low price because of the supply, and diamonds, something you can live your entire life without, unless you're in Sierra Leone or something. And why is that so expensive? This makes no sense. Well, that is supply and demand. Now, another way prices can rise is by drastically increasing the supply of money. And they had never heard that. In all their years of all their schooling and all their degrees, they had never heard something that took me about a minute and a half to give them a general idea of, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because if there's only one Babe Ruth signature, it's very valuable. It can go for millions. But if everyone is given a Babe Ruth signed baseball at birth, they're not going to have much value. Well, if you drastically increase the number of dollars, each one is going to have less value than it otherwise did. So I think when it comes to a crisis like this, we really got to push people and take advantage of at least having a one-liner or an elevator pitch to, hopefully awaken the right person who will tell the right narrative to wake up the masses.
Yeah, and one of my things is someone mentioned it last night, and I didn't say this, but what I wanted to say was like, well, that's what happens when 60% of the United States money that's ever been printed is printed in 1 year. Isn't it? Is it 60%? One of the reasons why I didn't say it is because I wasn't sure on the percentage.
It's something like 40 to 60.
Yeah.
It just something ridiculous. But then again, I've just heard that. I haven't looked exactly, but I know that, it's just outrageous. And it was Trump and Biden doing it. So you can even get this total elite black sheep like Trump, who's getting, pounded by the intel agencies over tons of fake stuff. So it's like you can work so hard to get a guy elected, and one, his hands will be tied, and two, he didn't even defend the people who went inside the Capitol. He didn't even have that courage, while the Democrats are willing to defend BLM and Antifa, who harass innocent, powerless people. But the second anyone goes after the powerful, most evil people on the planet, Trump can't even defend them. So look, you do all this work, you raise $70 million for the recounts, and those go nowhere. Politics is just AIDS. It's terrible.
Yeah. So one of my other themes, I guess, for more of like an introspective kind of thing is kind of towards the end of the year is division in the liberty movement. This is a bit more controversial, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. I didn't tell you that I was going to bring this up, but I've just been concerned with division in like our corner of the liberty movement, especially with the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff. And you see kind of this split between praxeologists.
Are you referring to
the Praxians,
like the Chicago versus the Austrian?
No,
division?
the post-libertarians, the Praxians. They call themselves the Praxians.
That whole thing is mainly they're differentiating between short-term goals and long-term goals, and saying that it's important we don't just focus on the long-term goal of, yes, getting people to stop believing in the myth of political authority, absolute long-term goal. But at the moment, we but probably in this sense have to get more politically active because just as South Korea is objectively better than North Korea, even though there's still problems in South Korea, DeSantis in Florida is better than Gavin Newsom's California or Bill de Blasio's New York City. So I don't think I haven't heard them say anything that Rothbard or Lysander Spooner would disagree with. So I don't see it as a terrible division of, breaking us apart. I just see it as different strategies, really.
Yeah, and I'm not calling anyone out or anything like that, but I expressed like concern when all this was happening, just that it doesn't become something that would split us up, because it just seemed like people, and like I've always viewed my position, and I think your position too, is kind of just like we're pretty much friends with everyone, and like I don't call anyone out or do anything like that. So like I don't really take a side as much, but it's just like at the time I was worried that there was going to be some kind of a division or breakup. And it seemed like, big figures getting in like really big arguments on Twitter. And at the same time, it's Twitter. But it does seem like things have kind of like healed a bit. And it's not like the hottest thing happening right now.
That's very common when you feel like you're sort of losing. You talk to people and will sort of push the blame on someone you can point to. I, of course, am always tempted to say, well, I'm real glad David Bose didn't put himself on the line and say anything too dangerous during this COVID thing. Look, he's a jerk. He slandered LPMC, which is horrible. Cato, I disagree with the poll that I gave on Twitter. Most people said Cato's not a net benefit. I disagree. I think they're a net benefit, but I'm open to being wrong on that. Maybe they're just a nice, useful idiot punching bag that we'd be better off without, but they've still produced so many great things that when you see things going so out of control and you feel so powerless, and Klaus Schwab does not answer your emails, well, who is going to respond to you? Other fellow libertarians on Twitter. So let's take out some rage on them. It's the equivalent of the parent who is going through a midlife crisis, miserable with their relationships, feeling isolated, and feeling like they're a total failure, and then yelling at their kid for spilling milk. This is obviously about something much bigger. But I mean, the post-libertarians are non-post. Again, I don't even see a reason to differentiate because they don't say anything that Lysander Spooner would disagree with. And they're just saying short-term solutions are required and political action, exactly as Rothbard said in his paleo years, along with Lou Rockwell. Ron Paul got involved in politics in the Republican Party. There's nothing that's worthy of division over this at all. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely common that people will point the finger to someone else if they can at least get a reaction. But the only people that are my enemies are people who cross state lines, because that's really just something so evil. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse crossed state lines. I just wanted life in prison for him. And the fact that he's roaming the streets free, that's my only problem.
That's true. I had this post that was like, I put on Twitter, okay, like, hear me out for a second, because now Kyle Rittenhouse is going and doing all these talk shows and stuff. And I'm just thinking like, okay, I understand what he's doing, but at the same time, if there was a COINTEL operation to cause further division between Republicans and Democrats in this country, would it look any different than what the whole Kyle Rittenhouse saga has been? I'm not saying anything about like Rittenhouse being a false flag or a crisis actor or any shit like that. Although there was some interesting things with the courthouse stream, like people's feet disappearing, like they were on a green screen or something. But I'm not even saying, you don't even have to go that far. I'm just saying that, like, if it was a COINTEL operation, how would it look any different?
It's hard to know whether or not things are operations or they're just capitalized on, because anything that happens, if you have such a powerful state that has its hands in everything, they can make it into a heads we win, tails you lose situation. There's a lot of terrorism. Government's got to ramp up and get more power to stop this terrorism. If there is no terrorism, thank God, look at what we've done is working. In fact, there's other threats on the horizon. And if we don't keep doing what we're doing by increasing spending, then things are going to get bad. So under no situation, it's the alcoholic who says, when things are bad, I need a drink. When things are good, I deserve a drink. When things are just medium, nothing going on, I need a drink to spice things up. You can always justify this sort of tyranny. They can always take an angle and divide the population on anything based on either fake economics or fake racism or fake sexism or Russiagate and urinating on beds for the Russian hookers and all this nonsense. Maybe, I'm not sure. The point is they can always do it. I don't think there's a single thing that just can't be politicized so long as people believe in a powerful state.
Yeah, and I'm positive it's just something capitalized on. You know, it's something that happened in the midst of the rioting, and it's like, how can we cause the most amount of division from this event as possible? And I think that it certainly succeeded. I mean, this was one of the biggest rifts in this whole post-libertarian flare-up that we were just talking about, was the Kyle Rittenhouse thing.
To be totally honest, I'm actually not even sure that I caught on to that. I know that Sal took a different position like a year ago. Sal was very anti-Kyle because really all we had heard at the time was he shot a guy who threw a bag at him, but we don't see that it's Rosenbaum egging him on, threatening to fight everyone around him, and then chasing the guy after he's running away. Like at that point. And then Sal's like most recent thing was, instead of, someone like Andrew Coffey who defended himself against cops, right libertarians chose Kyle to be sort of their poster boy advocate. I hate poster, but it's such a cheap term. I was going to say poster advocate, but that also sounds dumb. Which I get, but the problem is that I did an Andrew Coffey show and it got more retweets and likes on the Libertarian Institute feed than anything else that I've posted. I titled it "Black Man Found Not Guilty After Shooting at Cops," or I titled it something like that. And that got a lot of attention. So yes, he's him and John Hurley, a guy who stopped a mass shooter and then was killed by the cops. Those are better people to use. The problem is when we say their names, people don't know what we're talking about, and we're not met with any reaction that we can sort of, capitalize on. Whereas Rittenhouse did. That was my only reason. Not like it's only Kyle's the only one that we can use. So I'm not sure, and I probably shouldn't have even said Sal's name, considering I know him and I could have had him on to have a discussion about this, but I just didn't see it as too fruitful.
Yeah. Well, and sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot or anything like that. No, but my thing was with Rittenhouse, and I don't think that you and I talked about this at all, but it was just that I didn't think that he was worthy of being put on a pedestal by people in the liberty movement, calling him a hero and stuff like that. Like, I don't think it's objectively true, because I think that, just because we have a legal right to go and defend our businesses by shooting people, that doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. You know what I mean?
Well, see, I would be in the hero camp, even though Kyle actually disagrees with this. I think someone at The Blaze on Elijah Schaefer's show said, "You're a hero." And he goes, "No, I'm not a hero. I wish this whole thing had never happened." Which, by the way, he probably believes, I'm sure, because it's still traumatizing to, having killed someone when you're 17. Yeah. Dude, if I did it today, as much as I'd love to kill my neighbor for that goddamn lawnmower that's so freaking loud at the most ridiculous hours, well, I can't really imagine doing it. And I'd be so traumatized, even if I did. Imagine it was, a just killing. That would be so rough to deal with. The reason I would put him in the hero category is you have what you could say are the usual pillars that you rely on to hold up this house of civilization called the police. That is the idea, of course, that we all have. But when they sort of just blatantly don't care to risk their lives at all, to stop all this protesting and rioting and looting. I mean, these businesses take decades of thought and effort to make, and these savages just burn them down. They really don't care. And then they're going to complain about, there's no job opportunity and we need free yada, yada, yada. So that is so vitally important to me, that when the people who are supposed to do it, the cops, don't do it, I so appreciate anyone willing to meet those psychopaths with what Pat Buchanan called force rooted in justice and backed by moral courage. I certainly would put Rittenhouse in the category of heroic for putting himself in a situation where he was at high risk, and he was needed. So, doing heroin and driving 100 miles an hour, that's high risk, but you don't need that. I literally think in the riots of 2020, after George Floyd, I wish there would have been more Kyle Rittenhouses, to be honest. But I'm open to being wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that if there were more, things wouldn't have escalated as much. If there were more people out doing it, I think that, like, at least for like the calculus for me kind of came down to, like, would I want my son doing that? And for me, the answer was no. And, like, talking about, like, how, the real operators in the world, like there's the whole Sun Tzu, like the best way to win a fight is to win without fighting. So that was my whole thing. But, at the same time, I was thinking about situations in which I would take my guns and I would go and defend businesses. And I think the only situation I would, like, engage with people like that is if they were at my house. I don't even know if I would go to a neighbor's house to defend them, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, well, that's definitely, something that when you don't have kids or a wife, you're like, I'll go anywhere. Just give me a gun. Please let me get these people.
Yeah.
But once you're a dad, you're like, oh gosh, I too much is at stake. I can't die.
Yeah.
So I guess, I do see it as sort of a, again, you could say everything is self-interested, but, willing to sort of risk for others, I still think is a great act of charity. The idea of bearing a cost. And he wasn't just there, pointing guns at people and discriminating. He was there, removing graffiti. He offered medical attention. So it's not like he was just some prick looking for his 15 minutes or anything. I still think that his overall actions are worthy of admiration. As far as what you would want your son to do, well, maybe that's all the more reason to appreciate other people doing it, because you really wouldn't want to do it. I mean, if you look at these terrible fires in the wilderness, God, those things seem freaking scary, and it's pitch black and you don't know which way is up once you get into them. I wouldn't want my kid doing that. At the same time, thank Jesus Christ other people are doing it.
Some people do.
I wouldn't have paper to print.
My other angle was just that, like, the thing that the state wants the most right now is for there to be, like, large scale violence in the street, the biggest scale. And if we can have, like, I think, the denouement of the domestic war on terror is going to be if street fights start breaking out between like Antifa and Proud Boy types, or just regular old conservatives with guns. Could you imagine the type of crackdown that would justify? And so I was just urging, people to de-escalate, because I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it certainly depends on the options you have. If there was a negotiation table where BLM and Antifa were saying, we call Kyle Rittenhouse to come and discuss a truce with the rest of us, then he should have taken that. But if his best means of stopping, the pieces of trash ruining the lives of innocent, powerless people, if all he has is the gun, well, then that's what you use then. I mean, I think in all these cases, he was very precise with who he wasn't just shooting into a crowd like he's going to Kent State for a protest working for the National Guard.
Right.
It was like, a psycho chasing him. He was justified in that. The other was a guy pointing a gun 1 inch away from his freaking face. And, the other guy had a skateboard or was going to kick him while he was down. So I gotta say that I am much more supportive of this because it was in response to something like that. So for the same reason, I don't want to appease any aggressors. I get that sometimes negotiating with terrorists is literally just the best way to go. That's
Yeah.
all politicians are, negotiating with terrorists. But I get that there is still a cost benefit analysis that we need to engage in, but I still think we need to admire people who, who knowing that the media, the Democrats, the professors, the journalist academics, and all the expert opinions of everywhere would be on the side of the rioting leftists of the anti-racism concept, knowing that they would be against you. He it was called a white supremacist by the freaking president of America, and Ayanna
Right.
Pressley and Cori Bush. I mean, dear God, what this kid has put up with, and he still has a smile on his face. In his Tucker Carlson interview, I still think that he is a net benefit and a positive role model.
Well, I think in a way, my own self-critique was like, am I making the perfect the enemy of the good? And you have a situation where, like you said, it's the entire cathedral is completely lambasting this kid. And is it quite the time to be like, well, actually, this is not the best thing. So I was thinking about that while this whole Rittenhouse thing went down, and yeah, but what a crazy circumstance. And I think that I don't think that there's any precedential value. Being a Wisconsin attorney myself, I don't think that there's actually any precedent from there is no binding precedent from a trial court decision. Now, I don't think, like, whether or not you could make analogies in like a different case. Does this make a precedent that we could go out with guns and keep them slung on our shoulders and physically prevent, without it raising to deadly force, without pointing the gun at anyone, physically prevent people from burning down our stores or from vandalizing or looting? And then if they escalate it to deadly force, then you can use your weapon. It really kind of outlines a fact pattern that can give people guidance for the situation.
And the rooftop Koreans of the Rodney King riots, where they're pulling a guy out of his truck and beating him to death with a brick. The rooftop Koreans could have set a bad precedent, but I still got to side with them, because with what was in their reasonable power to do, they took the risk in doing. And certainly I wish I had more courage to do it, but
yeah.
I remember it was like a mile away from my house, so that they were where I was living at the time. There was rioting, and Logan Paul, Jake Paul or Logan Paul, got in big trouble for being at the Scottsdale Mall while they're throwing bricks into PF Chang's. Gorgeous place to drive through downtown Scottsdale, and these assholes are just wrecking the place, based on a debunked conspiracy theory called racism. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, I really hope that it doesn't come to me having to freaking defend myself, because they're these useful idiots. Even soldiers fighting for totally immoral regimes, I still don't want to see them die, but if it's at the expense of just complete ruin and a complete blank check to every city from, California to Nashville, then the price is too high. And that sort of rule of thumb of, yes, people can take their defense of not only themselves but defense of others into their own hands, I totally support it. Yeah. And as a good future disincentive to the savages of the planet.
Well, I was saying that it's a good precedent. So don't get me wrong. I think it's a good precedent, like a legal precedent. I don't think there's any like actual binding precedential value from the trial and how the law was interpreted in the ultimate result. But I do think it's a good precedent that we have a legal situation where a person has brought a gun to protect a store. They don't use it to deter looters, but in the situation where the looters raise, to a level of deadly force, then you can use the gun to defend yourself. And I think that's a good development.
Oh, and I wish someone would have shot the prosecutor as he picked up a gun, pointed it at the jury, and had his finger on the trigger. That would have been a nice precedent. Thou have the right to shoot at the prosecutor for acting stupid in court.
You and I were talking the other night. We weren't recording, but we were talking the other night, and
how we thought that was fake.
Maybe, but I mean, at the same time, we looked at the actual brandishing statute in Wisconsin law, and what he did is illegal.
Yeah. You can break the law right in front of a judge's face on camera.
Yeah.
And it must have been because he was white, not because he's a simp for the state.
So, any other big takeaways from this year before we wrap her up?
Yeah, big takeaway. Value the immediate relationships in your life, because what a wise man of the CorbettReport.com calls survival currency, money is simply a medium of exchange for the things that we value, whereas the greatest thing we value is the relationships from which we later are able to get products and services from. So make sure you're distinguishing ends from means, and the great ends in life are having good relationships, friends you can rely on, places to stay. If you have to lose your job because of some tyrannical mandate or something or other. So the value of our relationships, big 2020 lesson, and the ability to find alliances. I'm supposed to have a number of people coming on to do a hearing the other side extension. I did it with Ben Burgess and Frank Ferretti, where I try to just become friendly with people on opposing sides. So they go from thinking that we're totally crazy to thinking that we're not crazy. I don't expect to change anyone's mind, especially while we're recording, but just to become friendly so we're not totally hostile. And I can end with saying, yeah, everything you want, I think, can be achieved through mutual aid societies, which I support, but I don't think you should ever have to send money to Trump if you don't want to, or send it to Biden, who, while he got, 80 trillion votes, I think, still, you shouldn't have to fund such a kind man whose brain is fully functional.
Yeah, and two, I really I value all the relationships. I've made more relationships in the Twitter, the liberty sphere, but on Twitter too. And I guess that's why I brought up division in the liberty movement, is because I just hate to see it, and I think that we're all, even if we disagree on some things, we can move forward. And I'm glad, because we were discussing, and I don't think that I've seen the division that I was afraid would happen. But things are going to get hard, especially as the Mises Caucus, I think, is going to be taking a lot of ground. And at least they appear poised to do that. And so just, I don't know, I hate to see the infighting, and I'm glad that it seems to have blown over. But you and me, buddy, it's been 4 years we've known each other. So,
something ridiculous.
Yeah, it's great. So, all right, well, where can people find your work? We'll wrap up this.
Odyssey.com, nigga. That's pretty much it. Of course, you can get me on YouTube and the Institute and everything, but I just love knowing that the Odyssey subs are there, because it's just so assuring, because I've been on 2 strikes for a while now. I think they get removed after some time. They're
supposed to, like 3 months, right?
Yeah, let me check that. But we don't have to stay on for that announcement. But one place, please, Odyssey.com, and I'm on the podcatchers and everything else. But yeah, that's it. Good talking, man.
Yeah, you too. And for me, libertyweekly.net, you'll find all my crap there. libertyweekly.net/Odyssey. I just broke 1,000 subscribers on Odyssey. So really glad for that milestone, and I love to see it on Odyssey specifically. So, all right, man. Well, Merry Christmas. I think we'll probably talk before Christmas time, but Merry Christmas to all you guys. Thanks for watching for the past year, and look forward to many years in the future. Peace.
Happy Kwanzaa.